I grew up surrounded by things that gleamed: marble countertops, silver cutlery, and smiles that never quite reached the eyes. In my family, everything had to shine, even the pain. My mom used to say, "Appearances are everything, Grace," as if love could be polished the same way you polish crystal. I believed her for a long time. That morning, the house smelled like pine and money. The tree decorator had just left, and the air still carried the faint scent of champagne from last night's charity gala. I should have felt lucky, but luxury loses its meaning when you have to earn your place at your own table. I was pouring my second cup of coffee, scrolling through email, when my mom's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated. Calls from her rarely meant affection. They meant instruction. Still, I answered. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. "What are you doing while listening to this story?" For me, I was standing in my kitchen that morning, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly went cold. Her voice was smooth and clipped, the kind she used when she wanted to sound calm but in control. "Grace, darling, I hope you're doing well," she began. There was a pause that stretched long enough to make me nervous. "Your dad and I talked about Christmas this morning. We've made a decision about the yacht trip." I smiled automatically, though no one could see it. "Oh? What decision?" She exhaled softly, like she was about to deliver a sermon. "We think it's best if you sit this one out this year." The words didn't make sense at first. Sit it out? You mean not come? "Yes," she said quickly, her tone sugar-coated and final. "We just want to keep things light. You've been so busy, and sometimes your energy can make things tense." My throat went dry. "My energy? You know what I mean," she said. "You're intense, Grace. It might be nice for everyone to relax this year without expectations." There was another pause, the sound of her bracelets clinking as she adjusted something. I could almost picture her at the kitchen island, talking to me while rearranging a vase. "So you're banning me from Christmas," I said quietly. "Don't dramatize it," she snapped, the sweetness slipping for just a second. "It's just better this way." "Who's taking my cabin?" Her silence said everything. Then she said it anyway. "Lauren and Ryan. You know how they've been under stress planning the wedding. It'll be good for them to get away, Lauren. My perfect younger sister, always the favorite. The golden girl who never had to ask for anything because people were too eager to hand it to her. And Ryan, her fiancé, who loved to remind everyone he came from old Charleston money." "Mom," I said slowly, "that yacht is mine." She gave a small laugh that didn't sound amused. "Technically, darling, it's the family's yacht. You were generous enough to put everyone's names on the paperwork." I closed my eyes. I had done that 3 years ago, when Blue Horizon Voyages finally turned profit. I thought it would bring us closer, that sharing success meant we'd finally be equals. But in my family, generosity was never seen as kindness. It was a weakness. "I see," I said. "You'll understand one day," she said gently. "Tradition matters. And this year, we just need peace." Then, without waiting for a response, she ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the window. The Christmas tree lights behind me flickered faintly. I looked calm, composed like my mother had trained me to be. But something inside me cracked, just slightly, like the fine line that had always run through my favorite coffee mug. By the time I drove to the office, I'd replayed that conversation at least 10 times. My assistant Sophie was already there, sorting through invoices. She looked up as soon as I walked in. "Rough morning?" "You could say that," I said, setting my bag down. She hesitated. "I saw your sister's post. The Christmas yacht trip looks nice." I froze. "What post?" She turned her laptop toward me. There it was. A photo of Lauren and Ryan standing on the dock beside the Seraphine, champagne glasses in hand. The caption read, "So grateful for family and tradition. Here's to another year aboard." The comments were full of praise. People loved the idea of a perfect family Christmas on a luxury yacht. I felt my pulse in my ears. Sophie's expression softened. "I didn't know they were leaving without you." Neither did I. I walked to my office window and stared out at the harbor. The same stretch of water that had once symbolized freedom now looked like a mirror, reflecting everything I'd lost. When I started Blue Horizon voyages, I worked 2 jobs and lived off instant noodles. My parents had laughed at my idea and said the charter business was a man's world. But when I made it work, when the bookings doubled and the reviews came flooding in, they suddenly remembered I existed. Dad even called me his sensible one. I thought that meant pride. Now I realized it meant convenience. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the yacht management company. I opened it without thinking, expecting a regular maintenance update. Subject: cancellation confirmation. I read it once, twice. Dear Miss Whitmore, this email confirms that your cabin reservation aboard the Seraphine has been canceled at the request of Elaine Whitmore, submitted 3 days ago. My hands went cold. She hadn't just uninvited me. She had erased me. I forwarded the email to myself and printed a copy. The sound of the printer whirred in the quiet office. Each line of black text felt like proof that something invisible had broken, long before this. When Sophie knocked again, I shoved the paper into a folder. "Heading out early?" she asked softly. "Yeah," I said. "Family emergency." I drove with no destination in mind. The city blurred past. Old brick homes, wrought iron fences, Christmas wreaths on every door. Charleston had never looked prettier. Or lonelier. I ended up at the marina. The Seraphine was there, docked under a pale winter sky. Crew members moved briskly, loading supplies. I saw Lauren on deck, laughing with Ryan. My mom stood beside her, wearing her signature white coat and pearls. Even from a distance, I could tell she was in control. For a brief, insane moment, I almost walked up to them. But then, Lauren leaned against Ryan's shoulder and said something that made him laugh loudly, and I saw Mom smile with approval. There was no space for me in that picture. I turned and walked back to my car. The wind off the water stung my face, but it also cleared my thoughts. At home, I went straight to my desk. I pulled out the yacht's purchase documents, the original contract, every transfer, every signature. My name was on every page, the title, the insurance, the maintenance account. I had paid for it, maintained it, and built it. They had only taken the credit. I stared at the folder, my chest tightening. For years, I had thought my silence was strength. That staying quiet proved I was mature, gracious, above the drama. But silence hadn't protected me. It had erased me. I picked up my pen and wrote on the folder's cover, "The truth." When I looked up, the tree lights flickered again, casting small, golden reflections across the floor. I imagined them celebrating, smiling, toasting to family unity. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. They wanted a Christmas without me. They would have one. But not in the way they planned, because next time they heard my name, it wouldn't be as the daughter they dismissed. It would be as the owner they forgot existed. It started snowing that night. A thin layer that barely covered the ground, but made the world quiet. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder still open in front of me, the words "the truth" written across it like a promise. The clock read nearly midnight, but I couldn't sleep. My phone was face down beside me, the screen lighting up every few minutes with family group notifications. Refused to check. When I finally picked it up, curiosity got the better of me. Lauren had posted again. A short clip this time. Music, laughter, champagne flutes, the shimmer of Christmas lights reflecting off the water. Ryan's voice boomed from behind the camera. "To the best Christmas yet!" And then Lauren added, "No drama this year, just family." I stared at those words until they blurred. Just family. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm, the kind that follows anger when you stop denying what's true. I made myself a cup of black coffee, sat by the window, and watched the neighborhood slowly wake. The air was sharp and clean. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's kid was throwing snowballs at his dad. It looked simple, effortless, the kind of love I had stopped believing in. I opened my laptop and began searching through old emails, bank transfers, and legal documents tied to the yacht. I wanted to be sure of what I already knew. Every document had my name listed first. I had paid for the purchase, the refits, the maintenance fees. The idea to co-sign with my parents had been pitched by our accountant for tax convenience, as he called it. I didn't argue back then. I thought family trust was stronger than ink. Around 9, I called Ronald Shaw, the attorney who had helped me handle the original transaction. He picked up on the second ring. "Grace, I was just thinking about you," he said, his tone warm but cautious. "How's business?" "Fine," I said, "but that's not why I'm calling." I told him everything, every detail of what had happened, from the phone call to the cancellation notice. He was silent for a long moment before saying, "I remember drafting those papers myself. You're the primary owner, Grace. It's legally airtight, so they can't take it away. Not unless you sign something that lets them," he said. "And knowing you, I doubt you did." I smiled faintly. "You know me well." Ronald cleared his throat. "You could file a notice of ownership before they set sail. It would stop any chance of them transferring the vessel or using it for events without your consent." I hesitated. "Would that cause a scene?" "Grace, they caused the scene," he said gently. "You're just putting your name back where it belongs." After we hung up, I sat in silence. The folder was still on the table, but it looked different now. Less like a wound, more like a weapon I hadn't realized I owned. By mid-afternoon, I drove downtown to the county office, filed the ownership notice, and requested a certified copy. The clerk handed me the stamped paperwork with a polite smile, unaware that she'd just handed me back a piece of myself. As I walked out into the cold air, I noticed a message on my phone. It was from my dad. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Gracie, let's not make this into a thing. Your mom meant well. You know how she gets around the holidays. Let her have this trip in peace." I read it twice before replying. "Sure, Dad. I'll let her have it." He didn't text back. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on the local news. But I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the folder on the counter. My hands itched for movement, for something to do that would make sense of the storm building inside me. So I cleaned. I scrubbed the counters, organized the drawers, and wiped down the refrigerator. When I opened the bottom cabinet, I found a dusty photo album I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were pictures from our first Christmas on the Seraphine. I was smiling, standing beside my dad on deck, my hair windblown and messy. Lauren was there too, holding a glass of cider, laughing. Mom stood behind us, her hand on my shoulder. For a second, it looked like a family. But when I looked closer, I noticed how I was slightly out of frame. How Mom's gaze wasn't at me, but past me, toward Lauren. I closed the album slowly. The ache in my chest wasn't nostalgia, it was recognition. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore," a crisp voice said. "This is Captain Ellis from the Seraphine. We've received notice of an ownership verification in your name. Just wanted to confirm whether you'll be joining us for the Christmas departure tomorrow." "Yes," I said before I even thought about it. "Yes, I will." "Excellent, ma'am. Your cabin is ready, and we'll ensure everything is in order." After the call ended, I sat there staring at my reflection in the kitchen window. I didn't look like someone planning revenge. I looked tired, but steadier than I'd felt in years. Sophie called that afternoon. "Grace, I know it's not my business," she said carefully, "but are you really going on the yacht trip?" "I am," I said. "Won't that be awkward?" "Only for them." There was a long pause, then she laughed softly. "Well, if anyone can pull it off gracefully, it's you." The drive to Newport took 4 hours. The roads were slick from melted snow, and holiday lights twinkled from every house I passed. I stopped once for gas and coffee, then kept driving, the hum of the highway steady beneath the soft hiss of the heater. When I finally reached the marina, Seraphine stood at the far dock, gleaming white against the gray water. I sat in the car for a full minute, my fingers wrapped around the steering wheel. Then I saw them. My mom, Lauren, and Ryan, standing near the entrance with luggage and laughter. My dad was there too, looking half distracted as he checked his phone. They looked like a picture from a lifestyle magazine. Elegant coats, designer scarves, the illusion of unity. As I stepped out of the car, a gust of sea air hit me, cool and sharp. The dock creaked under my boots as I walked closer. No one noticed me at first. Then Lauren turned, her smile fading when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Coming aboard," I said. My mom stepped forward, her hand tightening around her purse strap. "Grace, this isn't the time for drama." No drama, I said quietly. Just family, right? Ryan let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're not serious. You weren't invited. I didn't respond. The crew member nearest us glanced between us nervously before speaking up. Welcome aboard, Miss Whitmore. His voice was calm, professional, almost rehearsed. We're ready for departure as soon as you're settled. Lauren blinked. Excuse me? The captain appeared then, tall and confident, holding the clipboard. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said to me. Everything's prepared according to your ownership instructions. My mom's face went pale. Ownership instructions? The captain nodded. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Grace Whitmore is listed as the primary owner of the Seraphine. My dad's phone slipped from his hand and hit the dock with a dull thud. Lauren looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. I smiled faintly. Let's not make this a thing, I said, echoing my dad's words from earlier. Then I turned to the captain. I'd like to board now. He stepped aside, motioning for me to go ahead. As I walked up the ramp, the sound of the waves filled the space behind me. The moment my heels touched the deck, I felt something shift deep inside me. For the first time, I wasn't walking into their world. They were standing outside mine. I didn't look back. Not yet. I needed a moment to let the weight of it settle, to feel the power of silence done right. Behind me, the crew's voice carried through the cold air. Owner aboard! The words echoed against the water, clean and final. That was enough for no. The sea smelled like salt and steel, the kind of scent that always made me feel both alive and alert. The moment I stepped onto the deck, the air changed. It was quiet but charged, like the pause before a thunderstorm. The staff moved with quick, precise motions, pretending not to notice the silent war unfolding at the dock. Behind me, I could hear my mom's heels clicking faster than usual, a rhythm that always meant she was losing control. Grace, she called out, her voice taut and brittle. I didn't turn around. I just walked farther across the deck, tracing my fingertips along the polished railing that gleamed in the winter. I remembered the day I had chosen this yacht. Every design detail, every fixture. Now it felt like walking through a memory I finally owned again. By the time I reached the lounge area, the captain had followed, carrying his clipboard. Would you like to approve the guest list before departure, ma'am? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, taking the papers from him. The names were all there. Elaine Whitmore, Thomas Whitmore, Lauren Whitmore, Ryan Hughes, even a few of their friends I didn't recognize. It was the same pattern every year. The same curated circle of people they could show off to. Only this time, one detail had changed. Mine wasn't missing. Everything looks fine, I said, handing the clipboard back. We can depart. The captain nodded, relayed the order, and within minutes, the engines hummed to life. The vibration beneath my feet was steady and grounding. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. When I finally turned around, my family was still standing near the entrance. My dad looked uncomfortable, his hands buried in his pockets, while my mom's face was frozen into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lauren whispered something to Ryan, who snorted quietly. Are you seriously doing this? Lauren asked as they stepped aboard. Doing what? I replied calmly. Making a scene, she said. You weren't invited. This is my yacht, I said, my voice low but even. How could I not be invited to my own property? Mom's smile tightened. Further, let's not be petty about ownership, Grace. This is a family gathering. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to all of us. I met her gaze, holding it. Funny. You didn't think that when you erased my name from the list. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned to the captain. Could you please prepare the main deck for departure? We'd like to start with a toast. The captain nodded politely, though his eyes flickered toward me, waiting for confirmation. I gave a small nod. He moved away. As the yacht began to glide from the dock, the marina grew smaller in the distance, the sounds fading into the soft hum of the engines. My family scattered across the deck, pretending nothing had happened. I stood by the railing, watching the horizon open wide. The wind caught my hair, and for a brief moment, I felt weightless. Inside, the lounge gleamed with holiday decorations. Twinkling lights wrapped around the staircase. Poinsettias lined the bar, and crystal glasses sparkled under the ceiling lights. The staff had set out hors d'oeuvres and champagne like it was any other Christmas trip. My mom raised her glass first. "To family," she said with practiced warmth. Lauren joined in, smiling too brightly. "And to peace," she added, her eyes cutting toward me. Ryan chuckled. "And no drama this year." I didn't lift my glass. I let their words hang in the air, light and false. When my dad noticed, he cleared his throat. "Come on, Gracie. Let's not start off cold. It's Christmas." I met his eyes. "Is it?" He sighed, rubbed his temple, and took a sip. The tension settled over us like fog. After a while, I excused myself and walked to the upper deck. The water below shimmered under the winter sun, and seagulls wheeled lazily overhead. For a while, I just stood there, breathing in the sharp ocean air until my chest loosened. Then footsteps approached behind me. It was my dad. "Grace, your mom is trying," he said quietly. I laughed under my breath. "That's her trying? She didn't mean to hurt you." "Yes, she did," I said softly. "She just didn't expect me to push back," he sighed. "You know how she is. Image is everything to her, always has been." "And you?" I asked. "What's everything to you?" He didn't answer right away. "Keeping the peace," he said finally. "That's not peace," I said. "That's silence." He looked out at the horizon, his jaw tightening. "You've changed." "I had to," I said. When he walked away, I didn't stop him. Some truths weren't meant to be debated. Later that afternoon, I sat in the main lounge working quietly on my laptop. From the corner of my eye, I could see my mom and Lauren chatting with Ryan. Laughter too loud, too staged. They were performing, as they always did, pretending nothing uncomfortable existed. Then I heard my name. "She's overreacting," Lauren said, her voice hushed but sharp. "She's always been like this. Competitive, sensitive, impossible to please." "Oh, she just wants attention," my mom replied. I warned her years ago about how this would look. Owning things, making money, acting independent. It isn't feminine. It's abrasive. Ryan laughed. "Yeah, well, at least she's consistent." My jaw clenched. I closed my laptop slowly. The faint click louder than I intended. The room fell silent for a second. I stood up and walked toward them. "If you're going to talk about me," I said, my voice calm but steady, "at least make sure I'm out of the room first." Lauren's mouth fell open. Mom's face hardened. "Grace, that was rude." "Not as rude as being called abrasive in my own yacht," I replied. Ryan smirked. "Touchy, aren't we?" "Not touchy," I said. "Just done pretending." I turned and walked out before they could respond. My heart pounded, not from anger, but from the weight of finally saying what I'd held in for years. Outside, the cold air stung my face. The sun was sinking low, staining the water gold. For a moment, I thought about leaving the ship, turning around, and letting them keep their illusion. But something in me refused. I made my way to the captain's quarters and knocked. He looked up when I entered. "Everything all right, Ms. Whitmore?" "Yes," I said, "but I want to make some adjustments to tomorrow's itinerary." He nodded, pulling out his schedule. "Of course." I leaned over the table, tracing my finger along the chart. "Instead of docking in Charleston for the Christmas Eve dinner, we'll anchor offshore for one night. I'll handle dinner myself." The captain hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Understood." As I left, I felt the slow, deliberate calm of someone who had stopped reacting and started planning. When I returned to my cabin, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a folded note written in neat, familiar handwriting. "Stop this, Grace. Don't embarrass us further. Think of the family." No signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the paper, placed it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. The engine's hum lulled the room into a steady rhythm. Outside, the sea stretched endless and dark. But I wasn't afraid. They had spent years teaching me how to stay small. Now they were about to learn what it meant when I stopped listening. I woke before dawn to the soft thrum of the engines and the gentle slap of water against the hull. The cabin was dark and cool, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. I lay there for a moment, watching a thin strip of gray light grow along the edge of the blackout shade. Sleep was pointless. Resolve has a way of making you wide awake. I showered, dressed, and left my hair down because the ocean air would win any argument with a brush anyway. When I stepped into the corridor, the lights were low and the carpet felt springy under my bare feet inside soft boat shoes. The crew moved like shadows, quiet and efficient. I followed the scent of fresh coffee to the galley, where a steward greeted me with a soft good morning and a cup that warmed my hands more than it warmed my throat. Marina found me on the aft deck. She wore a navy jacket, hair pulled back in a clean knot, clipboard tucked under one arm. Her eyes were sharp and unflinching. She had been with this yacht since the delivery day, and even before that, when it was only a catalog number and a dream I refused to let go of. She said my name as if it were both a hello and a warning. I nodded toward the benches, and we sat. The sky was turning a pale pewter, and somewhere out there the horizon waited for color. She said she needed to tell me something before the others woke. Last week, she said she received a request from Whitmore Holdings through their counsel to initiate a registration review. The phrase sounded routine, unless you knew the game. A registration review can be a pretext. She had stalled it, she said, because the request tried to change the primary contact from me to my mom, and to a family trust that had never been disclosed to the vessel manager. Her mouth shaped the words family trust like it tasted of tin. I asked if she had the details. Marina nodded and slid a folder from her clipboard. Inside was a copy of an email chain between my mom and Cliff Daniels pushed through a law clerk at odd hours. The clerk wanted an executed consent from me. The draft consent attached to the message had my name typed in a font I would never use, and a signature block filled with a shade of blue I have never owned. A note above it said the owner will sign after the holiday. The owner was me. The signature was not mine. I felt the cold come up through the soles of my shoes. I kept my voice even. I asked Marina how long she could hold them off. She said she could keep the paperwork in a holding pattern as long as the yacht remained at sea and the operating orders stayed consistent with mine. Instructions. She said she also kept scanned copies of the original bill of sale and the wire confirmation from the day I sent $4.3 million from Blue Horizon's account. She told me she did that not because she expected trouble, but because she respects clean lines. I told her I respected that too. Morning came over the water in quiet layers. The deck lights clicked off. The horizon shifted from pewter to a slow wash of rose. A gull drifted low in the slipstream and then fell away. I breathed in and felt the taste of salt steady me. We went through the day's plan. I confirmed the change I had asked the captain to make the night before. Instead of returning to the Charleston harbor for a long public dinner ashore, we would anchor outside the main channel and dine aboard. I told Marina I would handle the guest arrangements. She glanced at me, then wrote it on her pad with a neat check mark. She asked if I wanted her to prepare the salon for a formal seating or something less staged. I said less staged. I told her to set the table as if we were a family that actually talked to each other. She almost smiled. As I stood to go, she said one more thing. She said she had heard Lauren asking a steward to move place cards last night, so that I would sit at the end of the table near the service door. She said she told the steward to wait for owner approval. She said approval was a word that sometimes saves lives. I thanked her. And I meant more than the table. By the time I returned to the main deck, the yacht was fully awake. Silver kettles hissed. A basket of pastries appeared as if conjured. My mom walked through the lounge with a silk scarf tied too tight, and a voice pitched for performance. She told a crew member that the floral centerpieces needed more height. She told my dad that the forecast promised smooth water. She told Lauren to post something cheerful. She did not tell me anything at all. Lauren floated toward the windows with a coffee she did not drink and said, too, no one in particular, that the lighting was not flattering. Ryan scrolled his phone, thumb rapid, eyes flat. My dad took a seat in the corner near a lamp, as if the lamp were company. I took my coffee to a quiet section of the deck. The sky had turned transparent blue, and the water below it looked like brushed metal. I tried to remember the last Christmas morning when my heart had felt unclenched. Childhood memory is a liar. It edits, it brightens, It adds the sound of carols where there was only the buzz of a dimmer switch. I set the cup down and decided I would not lean on memory for strength. I would lean on paper. I returned to my cabin and laid out everything on the bed. The bill of sale, the insurance binder, the first maintenance contract, the crew roster with my approval, notation in the margin, the notice I filed at the county office, stamped and dated in clear ink, the email from the charter company confirming the unauthorized cancellation my mom had submitted. I made a second set of copies and slipped them into clear sleeves. I labeled one set for counsel and one set for the table. The labels made me smile. It felt good to be tidy when the world around me was messy on purpose. I was slipping the last page into a sleeve when there was a knock. I said, "Come in," and my dad stepped through the door like a man who had not yet decided whether to be brave. He looked at the spread of papers and then at me. He said it looked like I was preparing for trial. I told him I was preparing for dinner. He tried to smile, then gave up. He said, "Your mom is nervous." He said, "Your sister is fragile." He said he did not want a scene. I asked him when it became my job to keep him from seeing things he should have seen years ago. He looked at the carpet and pressed his lips together. I asked him why he let them cancel my cabin without calling me first. He said he thought it would blow over. He said he did not think it would go this far. He said he did not think I would come. When he said, "I did not think you would come," his voice wavered like a wire, pulled too tight. I told him I had finally learned how to show up for myself. He nodded once. He said he did not know how to do that anymore. He said he was sorry in a voice so quiet it almost did not exist. It was not enough, and it was not nothing. After he left, I tucked the copies into a leather folio and slid it under my arm. I checked my face in the mirror. Calm beats pretty when truth is on the way. I took a breath and opened the door. By late morning, the yacht had found its rhythm. Lunch was bright and forgettable. Someone insisted on a game no one wanted to play. Lauren filmed a short clip near the bow. Head tilted, smile tilted, life tilted. My mom took a call that made her tone sweeter than sugar, then ended it and told a steward to change the linens in her cabin for a better thread count. Ryan asked the captain if the boat had a faster route to Charleston because he had plans with friends later. The captain said the sea did not take requests. I asked Marina to meet me briefly in the wheelhouse. The captain stepped out to the bridge wing and pretended to study the sky. I placed the folio on the console and showed Marina the stamped notice and the original wire confirmation. I said you already had everything you needed, but here is everything again. She said she would log it in the master file and in a sealed digital backup. She said, "Redundancy is the kind of romance that keeps a vessel safe." She then, 2 days earlier, she said, a staffer from Whitmore Holdings had called to ask for the crew roster for the dinner, and whether the crew could announce the Whitmore family as hosts when guests boarded in Charleston. She said definition, and that it belongs to the name on the title. I asked her what the staffer said. She said the line went quiet for a long time, and then the staffer asked again about centerpieces. We went to sunset service on the aft deck, soft music, dinner inside the main salon with open seating, a short reflection on gratitude that anyone could offer if they felt moved to speak. I told her I expected people to feel very moved. She lifted an eyebrow as if to say she would be ready for anything a human voice. I walked the starboard side alone, the teak warm enough underfoot to remind me it had been chosen with care. The sky had taken on that deep afternoon color that makes everything look honest. I leaned against the railing and watched the wake unspool behind us like a seam ripping in perfect straight lines. Footsteps joined me. Lauren stopped a few feet away, arms folded. She asked if I was done playing captain. I said I was not playing anything. She said I was always like this, treating people like they were staff in my personal movie. She said I had embarrassed Mom. She said Ryan thought this trip would be fun and now it was awkward. I told her awkwardness is what happens when truth enters a room where lies have been comfortable. She rolled her eyes and called me dramatic. I told her calling a woman dramatic is the oldest trick in the book and the least original. She stepped closer, lowered her voice, and said, "This is not your stage." I looked back at her and said, "I built the stage and I paid for the lights." For a second, something softer moved in her expression, and then it was gone. She told me to be careful. I asked if that was a threat. She said it was advice. Then she walked away, fast, like a person who had remembered a line she needed to deliver somewhere else. Late in the afternoon, a thin veil of cloud slid over the sun. The captain adjusted speed. The sea turned the color of pewter again. The crew began to transform the deck. Lanterns appeared on tabletops. Linen fell in clean, simple lines. No place cards, no hierarchy, just plates and space and a chance. I went to my cabin to change. I chose a simple navy dress and low heels I could walk the entire boat in, without thinking about my feet. I slipped the leather folio under my arm and stood there for a breath, looking at the woman in the mirror. She looked like someone who had walked through a door and closed it behind her, without slamming it. That felt correct. On my way back to the salon, I passed my dad in the corridor. He asked if I needed help with anything. I said yes. I asked him to sit near the middle of the table and listen. He nodded, as if I had assigned him a job he could finally do. That gave me something like hope. Pared down and modest, but real. The first guests who were not family arrived in a tender as the last of the daylight melted. Old friends of my parents, a couple who used to summer in the same town, a business acquaintance who loved to talk about classic sales, though he had never learned to tie a bowline. Facebook I knew. Faces that knew me. Faces that had chosen not to notice the ways I had been erased. They stepped aboard and smiled wide. The crew welcomed them with soft-spoken grace. I could feel the question in the air as people realized how the evening had been arranged. No dais, no spotlight, no announcement that cast my mom as mistress of ceremonies. Just a handsome room, warmed by the glow of candles and a quiet certainty that something measured and true was about to happen. Marina caught my eye from across the room and gave the smallest nod. The kind of nod a person gives when the lines are clean and the ship is ready. I rested my hand on the back of a chair and let the hum of voices swell and settle. In the pocket of my dress, the outline of a paper corner pressed against my skin. It steadied me. It reminded me that truth is not loud. It is simply present. The captain stepped forward to confirm that we were anchored and secure. He asked if the owner wished to say a word before dinner. Heads turned. A few faces shifted in surprise. My mom's smile held, but I saw the edge fray. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Ryan checked his phone as if a text might save him from a moment he could not control. My dad's hands folded together on the table as if he were praying in a language he had forgotten. I felt the yacht settle under my feet, a small downward sigh as the chain took up the slack. I breathed in the salt air that drifted through the open doors, placed the leather folio on the table where the candlelight could find it, and let the room quiet itself without my asking. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like pressure, heavy and expectant. The sound of the waves outside was the only thing that moved. Candlelight flickered against the polished glassware, catching the gold trim of the plates. Every eye in that room was on me, and for once, I didn't shrink under it. The captain's words still lingered in the air. The owner. I didn't need to raise my voice. The title itself had already done half the work. I rested a hand on the folio lying flat on the table and said softly, "Thank you, Captain." He inclined his head, then quietly stepped back. I looked around the table. Familiar faces, every one of them. My mom's friends from the charity circuit. My dad's old business partners. People who had watched me grow up but never really seen me. Their expressions ranged from curious to uncomfortable, the kind of unease that comes when the script everyone rehearsed suddenly changes. I let the silence stretch until it began to hum. Then I said, "Before we eat, I'd like to share something." Lauren's fork clattered against her plate. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle. Mom said, "Grace, this really isn't the time for speeches." I smiled. "I'm not making a speech, Mom. I'm clarifying a few things." Her eyes flashed, but I didn't look away. I opened the folio and lifted the first page. It was the ownership certificate. Signed and dated. The gold seal shimmered faintly under the candlelight. I laid it flat in front of me. Then the second page, the bill of sale, the wire confirmation, the insurance document. All neat and clear. For those of you who don't know, I said, I bought the Seraphine 5 years ago. Every payment, every inspection, every repair has been handled under my name. You've all enjoyed its comforts, and that's fine. But recently, I learned my name had been removed from the guest list for this trip. I paused, letting that settle. A ripple of whispers passed around the table. Mom straightened, her voice syrupy smooth. Grace, that's completely unnecessary. This is a family business. Exactly, I said, and the family should be honest. Lauren groaned under her breath. Oh my God, here we go. I continued as if she hadn't spoken. 3 days before departure, my reservation was canceled without my consent. My cabin was reassigned, and when I asked why, I was told my presence would make things tense. Ryan muttered something about attention seekers. I turned toward him slowly. You know, Ryan, people who rely on others' money to fund their lifestyle should probably sit this part out. He flushed red. My mom hissed Grace under her breath, but her tone carried no power anymore. I lifted another sheet from the folder. This one was the cancellation email, printed directly from the charter company, showing her name as the requester. The room tightened like a pulled drawstring. Dad finally spoke. Grace, what is this going to solve? I looked at him, steady and quiet. It's not about solving anything, Dad. It's about naming what's been done. He looked away, his hand gripping the edge of his chair. Mom forced a small laugh. You're making it sound so dramatic. It was just a logistical issue. You know how busy the holidays get. I leaned forward. Is that what you call it when you try to forge my signature to transfer ownership? Her head snapped up. What did you just say? I held her gaze, unflinching. Marina showed me the correspondence. Your lawyer sent a draft consent with a fake signature, claiming the owner would sign after the holiday. That owner was supposed to be me. A collective breath sucked through the room. Someone's glass tipped, spilling wine across the linen. My mom's face drained of color, then flooded red. That's ridiculous. You're twisting things. No, I said softly. You are. For years. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, the muscles in her jaw twitching. Lauren slammed her napkin down. You're humiliating her. I turned to her. She did that herself when she lied. My dad stood, hands raised. Enough. This isn't the place. It is, I said, because this is where you all decided I didn't belong. The hum of the engine seemed louder now. The room had gone too still, as if the air itself was waiting for a verdict. I pushed the papers toward the center of the table. Anyone who wants to see the truth can. No one moved. After a long moment, my mom whispered, You don't understand what it's like to protect a family name. I looked at her, my voice steady but low. I understand exactly what it's like. I built one. You just couldn't stand that it didn't need your approval. The words landed like a match on dry leaves. My dad reached for her shoulder, but she shook him off. Lauren muttered something I didn't catch, her voice trembling. Ryan leaned back, his face blank, trying not to be noticed. I straightened the papers one last time and closed the folio. The sound of it snapping shut felt final. Dinner resumed, or at least tried to. Plates were moved, but no one ate. Conversation splintered into fragments. People whispered about the weather, the sea, anything that wasn't real. I stayed silent. I'd said what needed to be said. When dessert arrived, untouched glasses of champagne still glittered under the lights. My mom had disappeared into her cabin. Lauren sat stiff beside Ryan, scrolling her phone. My dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders bowed, the weight of decades pressing down. As the guests slowly excused themselves, Marina approached quietly. She placed a folded napkin beside my plate. Inside it was a small piece of paper with her handwriting. Port authorities confirmed receipt of your ownership verification, it said. All filings secured. I nodded in thanks. She gave a small, respectful smile before slipping away. The last of the guests departed to their cabins. The room emptied until only my dad remained. He stared at the document still lying on the table. He said quietly, You didn't have to do this in front of everyone. I sighed, tired but certain. I did, Dad. Because if I said it in private, you'd all pretend it never happened. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, You're right. He didn't defend her. He didn't try to soften the truth. He just said it. And for once, that was enough. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folio, and stood. As I walked toward the deck doors, the reflection in the glass stopped me. The woman staring back wasn't angry anymore. She looked still, composed, even a little sad. Outside, The air was cold and clean. The moon hung low, scattering a path of silver over the water. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the salt, feeling the steady pulse of the sea beneath the hull. Behind me, muffled voices rose faintly, then quieted again. Somewhere inside that ship, my mother was spinning a new version of the story. She always did. But this time, I didn't care how it sounded when she told it, because the truth was no longer her property to rewrite. It was mine. I stayed there until the moon slipped behind a bank of clouds and the sea went dark. Again. The wind pressed against my hair, and for the first time, I didn't resist. I just let it move through me, cold and honest and cleansing. Inside, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone stopped behind the glass door, hesitating, then turned away. I didn't need to know who. I turned back toward the open water and watched the faint line of dawn, beginning to form far beyond the horizon. It wasn't bright yet, but it was coming. The faint line of dawn deepened as I stood there, watching it stretch across the water like a wound that refused to close. The cold bit at my fingertips, and I realized I hadn't moved in nearly an hour. My skin stung, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, still my own. When I finally turned back inside, the lounge was empty. The soft hum of the generator filled the silence. Champagne glasses still glistened under the muted light, half empty and forgotten, like remnants of a performance that had ended too late. A single napkin lay crumpled near the edge of the table, stained with lipstick that wasn't mine. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the trash. I made myself a cup of coffee in the galley. The aroma filled the space, comforting in its simplicity. It was strange how something as ordinary as coffee could ground you after an evening like that. Marina appeared from the corridor, still in uniform, her hair pulled back, her face calm but alert. She asked if I had slept. I shook my head. She gave a small smile. Most people don't sleep well after a storm, she said. I asked her if she meant the weather or the people. She smiled again, but didn't answer. I carried my mug back to the deck. The sea was still. The sunrise had turned gold now, shimmering across the ripples. I thought about what would happen next, about how my mom would try to rewrite the story before breakfast. She'd twist the truth, soften her intentions, and insist everything had been misunderstood. She was always good at that. By the time I went back inside, the others were starting to stir. I could hear footsteps. The creak of doors, the murmur of voices. The air smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Lauren was the first to appear. Her hair was perfectly brushed, makeup redone, smile was too bright. She looked like someone who had rehearsed forgiveness in the mirror. She poured herself orange juice and leaned against the counter. "You really made a scene last night," she said, her tone casual but edged. I took a slow sip of coffee. Truth tends to look like a scene when people aren't used to it. She rolled her eyes. Mom barely slept. She was crying half the night. I set the cup down and met her gaze. Maybe she should have thought about that before trying to steal from me. Lauren's mouth tightened. That's not fair. Neither was what she did. She looked away, her voice softening. I didn't know about the forged papers. I believed her. For all her flaws, Lauren had never been subtle enough to scheme in secret. I asked her quietly, "Did you know about the cancellation?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I thought Mom was just trying to keep the peace. She said you'd been stressed, that you needed space. I didn't ask questions." "You never do," I said. She flinched, and for a second I almost regretted it. Then Ryan walked in, yawning, shirt unbuttoned halfway, and the air shifted again. He glanced at me, then at Lauren. "What are you two whispering about?" "Nothing," I said. He smirked. "That'd be a first." Lauren frowned. "Lauren, not now." He poured himself coffee and grinned. "Come on, babe. Everyone's thinking it." Grace just loves being the center of attention. She couldn't let Mom have one peaceful holiday. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, but cleanly, like glass breaking underfoot. I walked closer, my voice low. "You think this is about attention?" He shrugged, still smiling. "Always has been." I stepped forward until I was close enough for him to see how serious I was. "Let me explain something to you, Ryan. When you've spent years watching your family erase you, and they finally try to take the last thing that's truly yours, that's not drama. That's survival." The smile faltered. He looked away first. Lauren touched my arm. Grace, stop. I took a breath and stepped back. Breakfast's in half an hour, I said. Be on time. I left them standing there, the sound of the coffee pot filling the silence. I didn't bother to break. By the time everyone gathered in the dining room, the mood was brittle. My mom sat at the head of the table, makeup perfect, pearls glinting against her throat. Her posture queenly as ever. She greeted the guests who had stayed the night, smiling as if the previous evening had been nothing but a lively debate. When I walked in, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned. Good morning, dear. Sleep well? Fine, I said. She nodded at the crew. Let's serve. Platters appeared. Eggs, toast, fruit, salmon. It all looked lovely, sterile, expensive. My dad sat beside her, quiet, eyes fixed on his plate. Halfway through breakfast, one of the guests, a woman named Donna, who had known our family for decades, tried to change the subject. So, Grace, she said brightly, how's your business? Still thriving? I said, even with all the family drama. A few people laughed nervously. My mom's fork froze midair. I smiled. I think transparency is healthy, don't you? Donna looked down at her plate. I could feel the tension spreading like ripples in the water. After breakfast, my mom asked to speak privately. She led me to the upper deck, where the wind was sharp, and the sea stretched endlessly around us. She didn't waste time. You embarrassed me last night, she said, her voice trembling slightly. No, I said. I told the truth. She turned toward me, eyes shining, voice softer now. Grace, I only wanted to protect the family. We've worked so hard to maintain our name, our reputation. You can't understand how delicate that balance is. I looked at her. I understand perfectly. You just never believed my name deserved to be part of that balance. Her lips parted. That's not true. It is, I said. Every time you cut me out, every time you told me I was too much, too loud, too different. You didn't protect the family, Mom. You protected the illusion. She stared at me, jaw trembling. You're my daughter. I nodded. I know. And for years I thought that meant I owed you silence. Her face went still. The wind tugged at her scarf, but she didn't move. Finally she said, So this is who you are now? Cold, ruthless. I smiled faintly. Number, just honest. She didn't respond. She turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the deck. I watched her go until she disappeared down the stairs. Later that afternoon, the sky darkened with a low, steady rain. The sea grew rougher, and the boat rocked gently with each wave. Most of the guests retreated to their cabins. The noise of laughter and chatter faded. I went to the lounge again, alone. Marina joined me quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She sat across from me without speaking. After a while, she said, You did the right thing. I don't know, I said. Maybe it was just overdue. She nodded. Truth usually is. We sat in silence, listening to the rain. Somewhere deep inside the ship, the engines hummed a low, steady rhythm. By evening, the storm had passed. I stood on the deck again, looking out at the calm horizon. The air smelled like salt and rain and renewal. I could still hear the faint murmur of voices below deck, but I didn't join them. The family had finally seen me, not the version they built, not the one they controlled. Just me. And though it had cost me whatever illusion of belonging I once had, the loss felt lighter than I expected. I stayed until the stars began to reappear, scattered and quiet, then went back inside and closed my cabin door. Tomorrow would bring its own reckoning. Tonight, I would rest knowing the silence finally belonged to me. The quiet the next morning felt heavy, like the yacht itself was holding its breath. I woke to the faint hum of the generator and the rhythmic creak of the hull. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the air thick and clean, almost too still. For a long while, I lay there staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint pattern of the wood paneling. There was peace in that stillness, but not comfort. I finally got up, wrapped a sweater around me, and walked barefoot to the galley. The scent of coffee drifted through the air. Marina was already there, her hair slightly undone, a sure sign she'd been awake since dawn. She handed me a mug before I asked. She told me we'd be docking by noon, weather permitting. I nodded but didn't answer. My mind was already spinning with what would happen when we hit land. My mother would go back to Charleston, smile through damage control, and rewrite the story so thoroughly that people would forget what they saw. My dad would stay quiet, like always. Lauren would bury herself in wedding plans. And Ryan, well, he would do what he did best, pretend he was the victim of someone else's honesty. But I wasn't going to let it end that way. I took my coffee up to the upper deck. The sea stretched endless and silver, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. Below, I could hear faint movement. My mom's voice carried in soft tones from the main salon, orchestrating breakfast like nothing had happened. She had always been good at pretending life could be rearranged with enough fine china and control. The table was already set when I came down. Lauren sat on one end, picking at fruit. My dad read the paper, though I knew he wasn't really reading it. Ryan scrolled through his phone, his thumb moving fast, expression bored. My mom was talking to one of her guests about charity events and donations, her voice smooth and professional. When I entered, her words stumbled for half a second, then resumed. "Good morning," she said, without looking at me. "In the morning," I replied. The tension was quiet but visible. Nobody mentioned last night. Nobody mentioned the truth sitting between us like a guest no one had invited, but couldn't ignore. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from my dad. He glanced up briefly, then gave a small, almost apologetic smile. After a few minutes, he said, "Grace, maybe when we get home, we can all sit down and figure things out." I looked at him carefully. "Dad, I think I already did." He nodded slowly, not arguing, not agreeing, just existing in that space where guilt lives. Ryan stretched, yawning loudly. "Well, at least it's over now. We can finally relax, right?" I turned my head toward him. "Over?" "Yeah," he said with a smirk. "You made your point. Everyone knows you own the boat. Congratulations." Lauren shot him a sharp look. Ryan stopped talking. "No, let him finish," I said softly. "Go on." He shrugged. "I just mean, what's the end game, Grace? You can't exactly fire your family." I smiled faintly. "Watch me." He scoffed, but I didn't say more. Some truths don't need repetition. The captain appeared in the doorway, politely clearing his throat. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "the port office just radioed. There's a small issue with the customs paperwork. Would you like me to handle it?" "What kind of issue?" I asked. He hesitated. "It seems a separate document was filed by Whitmore Holdings last week, requesting transfer of operational authority." My mom's fork froze midair. I met the captain's eyes. "You can disregard that," I said evenly. "I filed an ownership verification 2 days ago. Use that record." He nodded. "Understood, ma'am." After he left, the silence was so sharp it felt physical. My mom spoke first, her voice trembling. "Grace, you have no idea what you're doing. This is a family asset. You can't just take it over like some hostile investor." I leaned back, calm. "I didn't take it over. I built it. You just finally noticed." She inhaled, eyes narrowing. "You think this power will make you happy? You think humiliating your mother in front of everyone was worth it?" "It wasn't about humiliation. It was about honesty. You keep saying that word, honesty, like it absolves you. But all I see is cruelty." "No, Mom," I said quietly. "What you see is a woman who stopped asking for permission." She blinked fast, her jaw tightening. I could see it, the cracks forming in her perfect composure, the kind of fear that comes when control finally slips out of your hands. Lauren pushed back her chair and stood. "That's enough." She looked between us, her eyes bright with something like exhaustion. "You two are going to destroy what's left of this family." I looked at her. "What family, Lauren? The one built on silence and appearances, or the one that keeps rewriting me out of its story?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharp against the teak floor. Ryan followed, muttering something under his breath. My dad stayed seated, rubbing his temples. "Elaine," he said quietly to my mom, "maybe it's time to stop fighting." She turned on him. "And do what, Tom? Let her ruin everything we've built?" "Built?" I repeated. "What did you build, Mom? A name? A facade? Because I built something real, and you tried to steal it. Her face flushed. You're being cruel. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said softly. I'm being clear. Then I stood up and walked away before the argument could circle back on itself. Outside, the wind had picked up, tossing my hair across my face. I stood by the railing and watched the coastline come into view in the distance. Charleston looked small from here, almost like a painting behind glass. Marina approached quietly beside me. She said the paperwork issue was resolved, and the dock team would be ready when we arrived. I thanked her, then hesitated. She asked if I was all right. I smiled faintly. I don't know if all right is the word, but I'm done pretending I'm not. She nodded, her gaze steady. Sometimes being done is the closest thing to peace. When we docked later that afternoon, the air was crisp and clear. The crew moved efficiently, ropes coiling, equipment secured. My family gathered their things without a word. My mom barked quiet instructions to a driver waiting on the pier. Lauren kept her head down. As I stepped off the yacht, the captain turned to me. Will you be sailing again soon, ma'am? I looked back at the Seraphine, its gleaming hull catching the sun. Not for a while, I said. Maybe next season. He nodded respectfully. We'll be ready. My parents' car pulled away first, then Lauren and Ryan's. I stayed behind, standing at the edge of the dock as the wind whipped through my hair. The marina smelled like salt and gasoline. For the first time in years, it didn't make me feel small. It felt like freedom. I turned toward the parking lot, my keys in hand. The afternoon light was soft, golden, almost forgiving. I didn't know what waited for me back on shore. Probably more denial, more rumors, more rewrites of the truth. But for the first time, I didn't care, because I had learned something simple and sharp out there on the water. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who doesn't flinch when you finally stop being quiet. And as I walked away from the dock, the sound of the tide followed me, steady and certain, like the pulse of something that had finally learned how to live. The sound of the tide followed me into the parking lot and then fell away, behind the hiss of my tires on wet pavement. Charleston sat ahead of me like a watercolor left in the rain. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the quiet settle into my bones. By the time I reached my street, the sun had dropped low and flat across the dead marsh, and the gulls were little scraps of paper against a pale sky. Inside my place, I hung my coat and stood for a moment with my hand on the back of the chair. The room held that particular stillness of a house that belongs to one person. No echoes, no competing stories, just the hum of the fridge and the distant rub of wind against glass. I poured water, not wine, and drank it standing at the sink, while the day replayed itself in clean, unbroken pieces. The dock, the look on my mom's face when the captain said, "the owner," the way my dad's hands had folded like he was holding something he could not fix. My phone lit up on the counter. A text from Ryan first. 3 words. You were cruel. I set the phone down without answering. Another message arrived almost at once. A different number I did not have saved. It was a screenshot. An email header. The subject line read, "Consent to transfer post-holiday." Below it, a line of text. Will circulate to Elaine for signature after Christmas. The sender name was a junior associate from a firm my parents liked to use for anything they did not want tied to Whitmore Holdings on paper. The recipient block included Cliff Daniels and my mom's private address. The attachment field showed a file name with my initials and the word consent. I stared at it until the edges of the screen blurred. Then I scrolled. There was a second image. This one showed the first paragraph of the draft. It identified me as owner, and then attempted to authorize the transfer of operational authority and signature rights to a trust I had never agreed to. The signature line at the bottom was blank. A note in the margin said the owner will sign after the holiday gathering. A short line of text followed from the unknown number. I found this on a shared drive at the office. I cannot watch them do this. The message ended with a single initial. R. I breathed out slowly, set the phone on the counter, and pulled the leather folio from my bag. Paper against paper, truth against performance. The weight in my hands steadied me. I was putting the screenshots into a clean sleeve when my doorbell rang. The clock on the stove said 6:17. Through the glass, I saw my dad on the porch, hat in his hand, coat collar turned up against the damp. I opened the door and stepped back. He smelled like rain and old wood. He said he would not stay long. He said my mom wanted to gather everyone at the house that night. He said she wanted to clear the air. He said there would be no guests, only family. He said it the way people say the word mercy when they are not sure if they are offering it or asking for it. I asked him why now. He said, "Because you did not blink today." He tried to smile and failed. He added that Ryan had been quiet since we docked, and that Lauren had locked herself in her old room, and that my mom had arranged candles and platters like she could set a table heavy enough to hold a lie in place. I told him I would come. He nodded like a person who had just been told there was still light coming through a door. After he left, I changed into a simple black dress and boots that did not slip on wet brick. I tucked the folio under my arm and drove across town to the house where I grew up. The live oaks along the drive held their usual dignified pose, draped in Spanish moss like a costume for a play that had run too long. Lights burned in every downstairs window, the kind of brightness that says, "Look at us, we are fine." Inside, warmth and cloves and sugar. My mom hovered near the island, moving small things an inch at a time. A centerpiece, a stack of linen napkins, a silver bowl with oranges that looked too perfect to eat. She looked up when I entered. For a heartbeat, something like relief crossed her face, quick and unguarded. Then the mask returned. My dad stood by the sideboard with 2 empty glasses placed perfectly, equidistant. Lauren lingered near the stair rail, makeup fresh, eyes tired. Ryan leaned in a doorway with his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual and landing somewhere near restless. My mom said we should sit. No one did. She folded and unfolded a napkin, then set it down with care. She said we had all said and done things in the last few days that did not reflect our best selves. She said the holidays make people dramatic. She said what mattered was that we move forward as a family. She said the word family with a softness that had always worked on me. It did not move this time. I set the folio on the island and slid it open. I placed the printed ownership record on top. Then the county noticed. Then the cancellation email with her name on it. Then the screenshots. The room drew closer by an inch. My mom looked at the pages and then at me. She said she never authorized a forged signature. She said she never would. She said this was a misunderstanding. She said lawyers sometimes write things in ways that look worse than they are. She said, protect the family name again, as if it were an incantation strong enough to change ink. I moved the top sheet aside and turned the screenshot so the light hit it. Cleanly. The line with the promise to circulate for my signature after Christmas lay in the center of the granite like a cut. I did not raise my voice. I said someone intended to use my name without my consent. I said someone intended to move authority out of my hands while I stood, smiling in a family photo. I said we were finished with that kind of theater. Ryan shifted his weight and stared at the floor. Lauren looked at him. Her gaze was sharp and unblinking in a way I had not seen since we were girls. And she called me out for leaving light switches on. She asked him quietly if he sent the screenshots. He did not answer. She asked again. He said nothing. She turned to me instead and asked if I trusted what I was looking at. I told her yes. She nodded once, small and tight. The sound of something old giving way. My dad picked up one of the glasses on the sideboard, set it down, and picked it up again. He said softly that he had known for years that the shape of things was wrong, and that he had kept quiet because quiet felt like the same thing as safety. Once, he said he had learned this week that quiet can also be the shadow truth hides under. Then he looked at my mom with a tenderness that made what came next feel heavier. He said enough. My mom stared at him as if the syllables had not been translated. Then she turned that gaze toward me, and all the warmth was gone. She said I had always been ungrateful. She said I enjoyed humiliating her. She said success had made me hard. She said she had created spaces for me and that I refused to fit. Her hands shook, and she tucked them under her arms like she could hold tremors still. She said I was doing all of this because I could not forgive her for loving Lauren more easily. The room went very quiet. I told her the truth was simpler. I said I had forgiven her for 1,000 small things, and that none of them cost what this did. I said this was about a line in a document that would have erased me with a single pen stroke. I said this was the last time we would confuse being a daughter with being property. The front bell rang. It startled all of us, though the house was not loud. My mom flinched like the sound had teeth. My dad moved to the door and came back with Ronald Shaw behind him, coat damp at the shoulders, briefcase in hand. He looked at my mom and then at me, and then at the papers on the island. He asked if we had a few minutes. My mom said this was not a good time. I said now was the only time. Ronald opened his briefcase and took out a slim folder. He said he had reviewed the county notice I filed. He said it was properly recorded and that any attempt to assign operational authority without my signature would fail. He said he could send a letter in the morning to every party copied on them, earlier correspondence making that position clear. He said he would also be notifying the vessel manager that any future requests, not initiated by me, should be ignored. He spoke like a man laying bricks. My mom said this was outrageous. She said he worked for us. Ronald looked at her with a kind of tired patience. He said he worked for the person who retained him for this matter, and that his duty here was to the owner of record. He said the law did not bend for feelings. He said that in his experience, feelings softened when the law finally did its job. Lauren let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. Ryan stared at the far wall like it might suggest a line. My dad closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again and looked right at me. Ronald asked if I wanted to add anything to his letter. I said yes. I included a line that stated no one had my permission to execute any document that referenced my name or initials in connection with the yacht, the trust, or any derivative authority. I included a line that said any further attempt to do so would be treated as intentional misrepresentation. Ronald nodded and wrote while he spoke, the way people do when they are used to carrying both pen and weight. My mom said she needed air and stepped back from the island like it had burned her. She went to the French doors and stood there staring into the dark yard where the garden lights made small moons around boxwood and brick. I watched her shoulders rise and fall. I had not expected to feel anything like pity. What I felt instead was a tired kind of grief for all the years we chose a pretty picture over a living thing. Lauren crossed to me and touched the edge of the folio. She asked if she could see the email again. I turned it toward her. She read slowly, lips pressed thin. She whispered that she had believed Mom when she said it was logistics. I said I knew. She nodded, still learning how letters become knives when arranged with intent. Ryan finally spoke. He said none of this made sense. He said no one would be foolish enough to try to forge a signature. He said this had to be a misunderstanding. I asked him why the note promised my signature would appear after the holiday, if it was all above board. He did not answer. He asked who had sent me the screenshots. I let the question float between us until it felt ridiculous to want to know. Ronald closed his folder. He said he would send the letter within the hour and copy the vessel manager, the charter company, and the firm that had circulated the draft consent. He said he would be available if my mom wished to have counsel present when they received it. He said good evening, and then he left, without shaking hands. The house listened to the door click shut. My mom turned from the glass. Her face looked smaller without the performance lighting it. She said in a flat voice that there would be consequences. I told her there always are. I told her we simply do not get to choose who pays them anymore. I gathered the papers one by one and slid them back into the folio. The room exhaled as they disappeared, as if it had been holding its breath too. My dad asked if I would stay for dinner. He said the roast was already in the oven and it would be a shame to waste it. I thought about childhood dinners in that kitchen. Chore charts, spilled milk, the way my mom used to ask for the best parts of the day at the table, like she could collect them and make a wall against anything unpretty. I said I would stay for an hour. My mom nodded once like a truce and moved toward the stove without looking at me. Lauren began to set plates. Ryan disappeared down the hall and returned with wine he did not pour. I washed my hands at the sink and dried them on a towel that smelled like starch and lemons. There was a comfort in the small work of arranging forks and straightening a placemat. The kind of order you can hold in your hands while the larger order finds its way. We sat. The clink of silverware began. No one tried it. No one said grace. The food was good, and no one tasted it. The room is filled with the ordinary sounds of a family eating when there is nothing ordinary about the air. Through the window, the yard lights flickered as a breeze moved the branches. Somewhere, a wind chime made a thin sound. When the plates were almost empty, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. A message from Natalie Rivers. She wrote that she had heard the whispers, and if there was ever a time I wanted the record to be more than something filed at a county office she had. Words waiting, and a space ready. I slid the phone face down again and let the invitation sit like a small lantern at the edge of a path. My mom lifted her water glass and set it down without drinking. She said we would talk tomorrow about statements and about what we tell people who ask. I said we would not. I said the only people who needed to hear anything from me had already heard it tonight. The words settled like sand into a jar. Nothing loud. Nothing that could be rearranged by another hand. We cleared our plates quietly. My dad carried the heavy platter to the sink with both hands the way he has. Always carried anything that matters. Lauren stacked dishes and did not meet my eye. Ryan wiped the table with a cloth like it was a task he knew how to finish. I took my coat from the back of the chair and slipped the folio under my arm. The front hall smelled like pine and wax, and a Christmas we had not earned. I paused at the door and looked back at the three of them gathered in the lint. Kitchen light figures cut out against a life we had been reciting instead of living. No one spoke. The hush felt almost gentle. Outside, the air was cool and thin. The sky above the oaks held fewer stars than it used to. Or maybe I was finally seeing how many of them were only reflections in old glass. I walked to my car. The gravel made that small, honest sound beneath my boots. I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel and the folio on the passenger seat like a companion. The dashboard clock rolled to 8:43. I started the engine and let it idle. Somewhere behind the hedges, a gate clicked. Somewhere farther off, a bell marked the hour for a house I did not know. I pulled into the road, and the tires found their line. There is a quiet that comes after a truth has been spoken in the room where it needed to land. It is not a relief. It is not a victory. It is a space where the next thing can finally begin. I drove toward it. The road stretched out ahead of me like a ribbon of quiet resolve. The night had deepened into that soft in-between hour when even the city seemed to take a breath. I drove without music. Windows cracked just enough to let the cool air in. It carried a faint scent of magnolia and the sea, familiar and grounding. Every few blocks, the traffic lights changed in slow rhythm, red to green to red again, as if reminding me that even movement needed pauses. When I reached my apartment, I parked and sat for a moment before getting out. The building lights glowed softly through the rain-spotted windshield. It felt like I was arriving somewhere new, even though it was the same place I'd left that morning. Inside, the air was still warm from earlier. I hung my coat, placed the folio on the kitchen counter, and finally exhaled. It should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like standing in a doorway with the world waiting on them. Other side. I poured tea instead of wine, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights shimmer on wet pavement. My phone buzzed once. A message from Lauren, just 3 words. Are you okay? I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, I'm fine. You? Her reply came almost instantly. Number. I set the phone down, unsure what else to say. There was grief in her now, the kind that doesn't come from anger but from the quiet breaking of something you thought would last forever. Around 10, there was another message. This time from Natalie Rivers. She said she'd been following what had happened, that she wanted to help me share the truth in my own words. She said it didn't have to be a fight, but a story, something people could learn from. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. Maybe, not yet. Sleep came in pieces that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the kitchen. The papers spread across the counter. My mom's face frozen somewhere between fury and fear. Around 4 in the morning, I got up and turned on the light. The teacup still sat where I'd left it. The folio was closed, but I could feel its presence like a heartbeat in the bot room. By morning, sunlight was already spilling through the blinds. I made coffee, showered, and dressed without thinking too much. My phone had a new voicemail. My dad's voice, quiet and slow. He said Mom hadn't spoken much since last night, that she'd been sitting in the garden at dawn, still in her robe, just staring at the fountain. He said she might need a few days to come to terms with everything. Then he paused. He said he was proud of me. It was only 4 words, but they landed like something long overdue. Later that afternoon, I drove to the marina again. The Seraphine gleamed in the sunlight, tied neatly to her berth. The crew moved about quietly, rinsing decks, coiling ropes, working as if the last week had never happened. Marina spotted me from the dock and waved. When I climbed aboard, she smiled. She said the captain had received Ronald's letter and that everything was officially in order now. My name, my authority, my ownership. I nodded. She hesitated, then said, "You know, I've worked on a lot of yachts, and I've never seen a family like yours." I laughed softly. "You mean complicated?" She smiled. "That's one word for it." We walked to the stern, where the sunlight danced over the water. I told her I might keep the yacht docked for a while, maybe even charter it for a few trips later in the season. Something quiet, something mine. She said that sounded right. She also said the crew would stay if I wanted them to. I told her I did. We stood there in silence for a moment, watching the tide shift against the dock. Then she said, "Sometimes people think cutting ties is about revenge. It's not. It's about breathing." I nodded. She was right. After she left, I walked through the interior alone. The dining area still smelled faintly of citrus and polish. The cabins were spotless, everything in perfect order. I paused at the owner's suite. My suite now. The sheets were crisp and cool, the way they always were when I was a guest here, not the owner. But the title felt different now. It wasn't about wealth. It was about truth. On the desk near the window sat an envelope I didn't recognize. My name is written in my mom's looping script. I sat down slowly and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Grace," it began, "I don't know what to say to you anymore. I know I hurt you. I know maybe I built my life around control because I was terrified of losing everything that looked perfect. I don't know how to love imperfectly, but I want to try." There was a pause in the handwriting. "Your father says you're building something new. I hope it's big enough for forgiveness someday. Mom." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't cry, though something inside me shifted, like a door creaking open just enough to let in air. Outside, the wind was picking up again. I stepped onto the deck, hair whipping across my face, and looked out over the water. The sound of its motor faint against the waves. The world moved forward, indifferent and beautiful. I stayed there for a long time, letting the wind wash over me, until the ache in my chest softened into something quieter. Later, as I walked back toward my car, I caught sight of my reflection in the yacht's mirrored window. For the first time, it didn't look like the version of me my family had made. It looked like someone standing on her own feet, finally steady. When I reached the car, my phone buzzed again. A message from Lauren. It read, "I think Mom wrote to you. She's scared, but she's trying." I replied, "I know." She sent one more message. "Maybe we can have coffee next week?" "Maybe," I wrote. And I meant it. I started the engine, rolled down the windows, and pulled away from the dock. The road ahead was lined with sunlight and wind. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was simply the space where endings start to turn into beginnings. Sunlight turned the marsh grass into sheets of gold as I drove home with the windows cracked and the winter air cool against my face. The word beginnings kept circling in my head. Not loud, just steady, the way a buoy bell carries over water. I parked, carried the folio upstairs, and set it on the kitchen counter the way you set down something that has done its job and earned its rest. The next morning I answered Lauren. Coffee sounded like a bridge I was finally ready to step on. We chose a small place on King Street with chipped white tables and the smell of cinnamon and old books. She was already there when I walked in, fingers wrapped around a mug like it was a talisman. She looked up with eyes that were tired but open. She started before I sat. She said she should have asked more questions. She said she had spent so many years trying to keep Mom calm that she forgot how to tell the truth out loud. She said she wanted to do better. There was no performance in her voice. No bright tilt, only the kind of honesty that arrives after something breaks, and you finally look at the pieces. I listened without interrupting. When she stopped, I told her I believed her. I told her believing I would still need work. We talked about the wedding. She said she did not know if she wanted a big one anymore. She said the idea of vows made in a room full of people who did not mean it made her stomach ache. For the first time in years, she asked me what I thought without already knowing the answer she wanted to hear. I told her a small ceremony could be sacred in a way grand halls never learn. She nodded like a person filing away a good idea for the first time instead of borrowing one. My phone buzzed when we stood to leave. It was a message from Ronald. He wrote that the follow-up letters had been acknowledged. He wrote that the firm that tried to circulate the consent had withdrawn it, and that Cliff Daniels had resigned from his advisory role at Whitmore Holdings without a statement. He wrote that the captain appreciated the clarity. The quiet satisfaction that followed was not triumph. It was a simple order restored. Later that week, I met Ronald in his office to sign 2 new documents. The first was a formal charter policy for the Seraphine that required my written approval for any guest manifest and any event use. The second was a letter authorizing a set number of community sail days each, season for families who never get near the water unless they are cleaning someone else's boat. Ronald read each line aloud, and I initiated slowly, careful with every letter of my name. He slid the finished pages into a leather binder and closed it with a small click that sounded like a door that finally learned how to fit its frame. As I left his office, Natalie sent a short note. She said she was still here whenever I wanted to tell the story on my terms. I told her I would think about it. That was true, not because I needed an audience to believe me now, but because I had things to say to the woman I used to be, the one who mistook silence for grace. My mom did not call that week. She sent 2 messages to Lauren that Lauren forwarded to me. Both were tidy and contained, like lists written in pencil. She asked if I would attend a New Year's dinner. She said we could keep it small. She said Dad was tired. For a day, I let the messages sit. I looked at the letter she left in the owner's suite and read the line about learning to love imperfectly, until the ink felt warmer beneath my thumb. I drove to their house on the afternoon of New Year's Eve with no expectation beyond honest minutes. The oaks lined up like they always had. The garden lights were already on in the early winter dark. Inside, the rooms were calmer. The table was set with simple china. No scripted place cards. No centerpieces tall enough to hide behind. My mom stood at the stove with her sleeves pushed up, stirring something that smelled like nutmeg and butter. She looked over and held my gaze. She said, "Thank you for coming." And she said it like it cost something and she was willing to spend it. Dad hugged me in that awkward way of men who have loved poorly and are learning how to love better. He asked about the crew and whether Marina had taken a day off yet. I told him she was still terrible at that. He smiled and shook his head, and for a second, I saw the father who used to quiz me on constellations from in the dock and called each one a promise. We ate with no speeches. My mom tried to make small talk and failed, and then stopped trying, which was better. At the end, she asked if she could say one thing. She said she had spent years mistaking control for care. She said it would take time to untangle those wires. She said she knew I did not owe her trust. She asked me to give her the chance to earn it. I did not reach for a perfect sentence. I told her we could start with small truths. She nodded. In that house, small truths felt radical. On New Year's morning, I drove to the marina before the sun. The docks were quiet and charcoal gray, the water like glass. I climbed aboard and the crew greeted me with warm voices that never needed to be loud. Marina handed me a travel mug. We cast off just after dawn and moved slowly out past the jetties, the city falling away like a story told in softer tones. Out beyond the harbor, the horizon opened, and the light got honest. I stood at the rail and breathed in air so clean it felt like a scrub brush through the mind. I thought about all the rooms where I had learned to be small. I thought about the kitchen island where I laid the papers down and the way. The letters did not tremble even when my hands did. I thought about Ryan and his neat smirk, and how it had finally slipped. I thought about Lauren asking for coffee instead of permission. I thought about my mom's face without the performance lighting it, and the way her thank you had sounded like an apology. Learning how to stand. Around mid-morning, we anchored offshore. The sea lay flat and kind. I sat at the small writing desk in the owner's suite with the window crack and the air cool on my wrist. I took out a clean page and began a letter, not to my mother or my sister or even to myself, but to the women who might one day think silence is the only way to be invited to a table they bought with their own work. I wrote about the morning my mom's name flashed on my phone and the coffee went cold in my hand. I wrote about the moment the crew said to the owner aboard, and how the words landed in my bones like a bell. I wrote about the night I set documents on a counter and let ink be louder than any raised voice. I wrote about the difference between cruelty and clarity and the thin wire that runs between control and care. I wrote about how boundaries are not a punishment. They are a map. When I finished, I folded the page and tucked it into the leather folio that had carried me through. I left the desk and walked back to the rail. The water sighed against the hull in small, even breaths. I closed my eyes and let the sun find my face. By afternoon, we were back at the dock. The first of the community sail families waited by the gate, a cluster of kids in hand-me-down jackets, and parents with faces that said they were not used to being expected. Marina had organized clipboards and life vests and a tin of cookies that looked like little buoys. A girl with a bright yellow scarf stared at the Seraphine with her mouth open, then looked at me and asked if she could stand at the front until her hair flew straight back. I told her yes. I told her that was the law of the sea. We took them out for 2 hours and then brought them back with cheeks shining and stories jostling to get out. One mom squeezed my hand and said it was the first time in months she had not felt tight in her chest. She did not say thank you like I was a savior. She said it like we had met as equals in a place that belonged to both of us for a little while. It felt right to begin the next chapter with that kind of exchange. That night in my apartment, the tree lights blinked softly against the window, and the marsh beyond turned the color of ink. I made soup and ate it standing the way you do when the day has been more than enough. My phone buzzed once. It was my dad. He said the soup Mom made had been too salty, and they both laughed about it. Anyway, he said they were going to try leaving 2 chairs empty at the table for a while. As a reminder, that room is something you make on purpose. He said he hoped I would fill one sometimes. I told him I would. Before I went to bed, I opened my notebook and wrote one last sentence for the year. No more shrinking to fit furniture that was never measured for me. Then I turned out the lights and let the house go quiet in a way that felt like respect. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.